Welcome to FOGMAN, where the darkest true horror stories come to life. If you're watching this at night, you might want to be careful. Because some things are better left unheard in the dark. Have you ever felt like someone, or something, was watching you? A door creaks open by itself in the middle of the night. A soft whisper echoes in your ear. But when you turn around, there's no one there. Or maybe there is, but you just can't see them. Tonight, we'll dive into 10 terrifying true stories, accounts from real people who have encountered the unknown. These are experiences so chilling that those who lived through them wish they never had. Do you have the courage to stay until the end? If so, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and brace yourself. Because what you're about to hear will send shivers down your spine. And don't forget to like and subscribe to FOGMAN, so you never miss another terrifying tale. Now, let's begin. Story 1. Christmas is supposed to be a time of warmth, joy, and togetherness. It's when families gather around, exchanging gifts, laughter, and memories. But sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the world is wrapped in festive cheer, something lingers in the shadows, something that doesn't belong. This is a story that has stayed with me for years. A moment in time that, no matter how many Christmases pass, I can never forget. And every time I walk by that spot in my house, a chill still runs down my spine. Because on that fateful night, I saw something, or someone, that was never meant to be there. It was Christmas Eve of 2006. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of freshly baked cookies, and the sound of holiday music playing in the background. Outside, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the neighborhood in a serene quiet. The soft glow of Christmas lights illuminated the streets, making everything feel safe. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace and the chatter of my family made it feel like the perfect holiday night. I had just finished saying goodnight to my family and made my way upstairs to my room. The night was cold, the windows lightly fogged from the warmth inside, and everything seemed normal. My sister was staying over for the holiday, which meant she would be sharing my room. Being the gracious sibling, I let her take my bed while I set up a makeshift bed on the floor. It wasn't the most comfortable arrangement, but I didn't mind. Everyone else was still downstairs, wrapping up the night's festivities. I wasn't quite ready to sleep yet, so I turned on the TV and started watching A Christmas Story, a holiday tradition of mine. The dim light from the screen flickered softly across the walls, creating faint shadows that danced along the edges of the room. After a while, fatigue crept in, and I switched off the TV, rolling over to face the open doorway. The hall outside was dark, stretching into the unlit corners of the house. That's when I saw her. Standing just beyond my door was a young girl, her head tilted unnaturally to one side. She was swaying gently, almost as if an invisible wind was pushing her back and forth. For a moment, my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. I blinked, my breath caught in my throat. The dim lighting made it hard to make out all the details. But she was solid, not translucent or ghostly like in the movies. She was just there, watching me. Her long, dark hair fell over part of her face, but I could still see her eyes, wide, empty, staring. She wore what looked like a plain nightgown, something old-fashioned, as if she had stepped out of another time. My body froze in fear. A deep, gut-wrenching instinct told me that she wasn't supposed to be there. I felt paralyzed, trapped beneath the weight of my own fear. I wanted to call for someone, but my voice refused to come out. My fingers gripped the blanket tightly, the fabric damp with sweat. The room suddenly felt colder, as if an unseen presence had sucked the warmth out of the air. Then, she moved, a slow, deliberate step forward. The wooden floor beneath her should have creaked, but it didn't. She didn't make a sound. My first thought was to call out for someone, but the fear pressing against my chest kept me from speaking. Instead, in a moment of pure childhood instinct, I turned away quickly and yanked the blanket over my head, as if hiding would make her disappear. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Lying there, I counted the seconds, listening for any movement, but the house was silent. Too silent. After what felt like an eternity, I peeked out from under the covers. The hallway was empty, but something was still off. The air felt heavier, charged with an unsettling stillness. My skin was covered in goosebumps. The spot where she had stood was directly beneath the attic hatch. That attic, the one we never used. The attic I had never once stepped foot in. The next morning, I told my family what had happened. They laughed it off, saying I must have been half asleep, that I had imagined it, or that it was just my mind playing tricks in the dark. But I know what I saw. She was there. She wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. She was real, solid, just as real as you or me. That night, I kept replaying the image of her over and over in my head. Why was she swaying? Why was she staring at me like that? And most importantly, why was she standing right beneath the attic? The thought sent chills down my spine. We had never used the attic, and I had always assumed it was empty. But what if it wasn't? What if something, or someone, had been there all along? Watching us, waiting? I never had the courage to check. To this day, I refuse to walk past that hallway at night with the lights off. The memory is too vivid, too raw. Something about that moment, about her, felt wrong, as if she was lingering there for a reason. I often wonder, was she just a lost soul, trapped between this world and the next? Or was she waiting for something? Or someone? There are encounters that shake you to your core, leaving an imprint that time cannot erase. This was one of them. Many would dismiss it as a hallucination, a half-dreamed image brought on by exhaustion. But those of us who have experienced something like this, we know better. We know the difference between imagination and reality. So tell me, have you ever seen something that shouldn't be there? And if you did you ever find out why? Story 2. I've always believed that some places hold onto energy, that certain moments in time refuse to let go of the spaces they once occupied. Maybe it's a whisper in the dark, a shadow shifting just beyond the corner of your eye, or the sensation of invisible eyes lingering upon you when you're alone. Some would call it paranoia. Others would insist there are things in this world that cannot be explained. This story comes from someone who experienced exactly that, a haunting presence in their home. One that seemed to grow stronger as time passed. And while skeptics may brush it off as imagination, those who have lived through such things know better. It started as a feeling, subtle at first. Just the nagging sense of being watched when no one was there. At first, I dismissed it as nerves, maybe even an overactive imagination. But lately, the sensation had become stronger, more persistent. It wasn't just a passing thought anymore, it was something that clung to me like a weight. An invisible force pressing against my senses. Just yesterday, I was searching for something in my closet. The door was wide open, propped in a way that should have kept it from moving. I crouched down to check the lower shelves when, suddenly, the door began to close on its own. Not just drifting shut, but as if something was deliberately pushing it toward me. I pressed back against it, heart pounding, and shoved it open again. "Stop it. Go away and leave me alone," I snapped, forcing my voice to stay steady. Instantly, the pressure stopped. The heavy presence that had been looming in the air seemed to vanish. And for the first time in hours, I felt alone, truly alone. But it didn't last. That night, as I settled into bed, the familiar unease crept back. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was all in my head. Yet, as I lay in the dark, the sensation intensified. It was as though something stood just beyond my vision, watching. I searched the room, but found nothing. Determined to get some sleep, I turned onto my side and pulled the blanket over my head. I must have dozed off for a little while because the next thing I knew, I was waking up again. This time, something was different. I turned over and glanced at the far side of my room. There, against the dim light filtering through the window, I saw them, shadows shifting ever so slightly, where no shadows should have been. The air turned thick, heavy with an unseen force. I yanked the blanket up again, ready to disappear beneath it, when an icy breath brushed against my face. A shiver ran down my spine. My vision blurred for a moment, a strange, foggy tint settling over it before my surroundings returned to normal. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. The sense of unease lingered, like an aftertaste of something bitter. But what unsettled me the most was the faint scent in the air, something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't the musty scent of an old house or the familiar fragrance of my own belongings. It was something foreign, something wrong. This wasn't the first time I had experienced something like this. Ever since the incident I now refer to as my first real fright, I had become wary of being alone. I wasn't always scared. Being around friends helped push away the strange sensations, but the moment I was by myself, the unease would return. It was as if the entity, whatever it was, waited for my mind to settle before making itself known. When we moved into this house 5 years ago, I thought we were getting a fresh start. My father had built the home from the ground up, designed just for us. It stood on land that was once a cornfield. Nothing but open space, a clean slate, or so we thought. My mother has heard things too. Sometimes, at night, she'll hear footsteps in the hallway or knocking at her bedroom door. She's even felt a presence lingering just beyond the threshold. She believes, like I do, that there are two of them. The presence in the hallway feels male, heavier, more assertive. The one in my room, though, that one feels different, lighter, but no less unsettling. It seems feminine, almost sad in a way I can't quite describe. The strangest part? My mother and I are the only ones who feel it. My brother and father, both skeptics, have never heard the footsteps, never sensed the chilling weight of unseen eyes. They insist it's all in our heads. But I know what I've felt. And I know, deep down, that we are not alone in this house. One evening, while my mother and I were sitting in the living room, she suddenly stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the staircase leading upstairs. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I listened. A moment of silence stretched between us. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, Deliberate knocks from upstairs. My mother gripped my hand. "It's here." I swallowed hard. We sat frozen, waiting for something else to happen. But the house fell silent again. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the shadows felt amplified. The next morning, I found my mother in the kitchen, her face pale. "It happened again," she said, the knocking, and then, a whisper. I didn't ask her what it said. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Stories like this always make me wonder about the unseen. Are these spirits trapped in a place they once called home? Or are they something else entirely, something feeding off the energy of those who can sense them? Some might call it a haunting. Others might say it's an echo of something that once was. But whatever it is, I know one thing for certain. Some presences refuse to be ignored. What do you think? Have you ever felt like you weren't alone? Story 3. There's a strange thing about the human mind. Sometimes it senses something long before the eyes can see it. Have you ever felt that prickling sensation on the back of your neck? As if someone was watching you? Or heard an extra set of footsteps when you were sure you were alone? What if that feeling wasn't just paranoia? What if someone, was actually there? Tonight, I'll tell you about a night that started like any other. A simple walk home, a shortcut through an alley. But by the time I reached my doorstep, I knew I had crossed paths with something that defied all logic. And trust me, what happened that night still haunts me to this day. It had been a long day at school, and all I wanted was to get home. The fastest route took me through a narrow alley that connected the school parking lot to my neighborhood. It wasn't the nicest shortcut. Fenced backyards lined both sides, casting long shadows in the dim evening light. But I had walked this path 100 times before. I knew every crack in the pavement, every broken plank in the fences. This was familiar territory. But that night, something felt off. At first, I ignored it. I had my headphones in, blasting music, and assumed my nerves were just playing tricks on me. But that feeling of being watched, it wouldn't go away. I paused, pulled out my earbuds, and turned around. Nothing. Just an empty alleyway, silent except for the occasional rustling of leaves. I shook my head and kept walking. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Still, I left my headphones off, listening to the quiet. And that's when I heard it. A second set of footsteps. They were faint, but unmistakable, crunching against the snow, perfectly in sync with mine. My breath hitched. I spun around again. Still nothing. I took a slow step forward. Then another. The sound followed. My heartbeat quickened. My hands clenched. This wasn't my imagination. Something was behind me. I picked up my pace, nearly running now, but the footsteps kept matching mine. And then, a cough. It was unmistakable, rough, rasping, like someone with a deep, lingering sickness. My body froze. I knew that sound. I had heard it before. But never like this, never so close. And then, I saw them. A group of figures emerged from the shadows near the fence, leaning against the wooden planks with eerie casualness. They were young, my age, maybe a bit older. Their clothes were tattered, their skin unnaturally pale, almost grayish. But what unsettled me the most were their eyes. Black, completely black, no pupils, no whites, just darkness. Among them stood one figure I recognized instantly. Him. The one I had heard before. The one whose cough haunted my nights. The one whose shadow I had glimpsed at the edge of my vision more times than I could count. He looked at me, his expression neutral, almost expectant, and then they vanished. No slow fade, no dramatic disappearance. One blink, and they were gone. The only evidence they had ever been there was the faint, acrid scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. Shaken, I sprinted the rest of the way home. But my nightmare wasn't over yet. The moment I stepped into my house, I felt it again, that presence, lurking just out of sight. I turned toward the basement door just in time to see a shadow slip down the stairs. My stomach twisted into knots. But I wasn't about to let this thing play games with me. I bolted after it. The basement was dark and silent. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, heart hammering, scanning the shadows. Then, just as I turned to leave, I heard it. A sneeze. Spinning back around, I searched every corner, every crevice. Nothing. I was alone. Or so I thought. I walked into the bathroom to splash some water on my face, trying to shake the unease settling over me. I looked up at the mirror, and there he was, standing right behind me. His reflection was clear as day. His black, empty eyes staring directly into mine. But before I could react, before I could even turn around, he was gone. Just like that. That was 2 days ago. And even now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel it. That presence. That watching gaze. Something tells me, this isn't over. Encounters like these are hard to explain. Was it a trick of the mind? A hallucination born from exhaustion and fear? Or was it something else? Something lingering beyond the veil of our understanding? Many who experience hauntings report similar patterns. Sounds that don't belong. Shadows that move on their own. And sometimes, just sometimes, something more tangible. Some believe spirits attach themselves to the living, feeding off their energy, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. As for me, I don't have all the answers. But I do know one thing. Once you've seen those black eyes staring back at you, you never forget them. And if you're lucky, they'll forget you first. Story 4. There are moments in life that defy explanation, fleeting encounters that leave us questioning reality. Some might call them coincidences, others supernatural occurrences. Whatever the case may be, they linger in the back of our minds, whispering doubts into the quiet hours of the night. This is one such story, an eerie childhood memory that remains unexplained to this day. I was 7 years old the day it happened. My family and I had gone to a local resort for a weekend getaway. It was the kind of place filled with the joyful noise of splashing water, the scent of sunscreen, and the laughter of children echoing off the tiled walls of the indoor and outdoor pools. It was a simple, carefree day, and I had no idea that something unsettling was waiting for me just beyond the shimmering water. As my parents set up lunch on a nearby table, I decided to take a quick dip in the indoor pool. The large room was dimly lit compared to the brightness outside, with water reflecting ghostly ripples against the walls. It was nearly empty except for a boy sitting at the edge, kicking his legs idly in the water. He looked a few years older than me, maybe 12, with dark, messy hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to watch me before I even entered. I slipped into the pool, shivering slightly at the cooler temperature, and paddled toward the deeper end. That's when the boy spoke. "I know your name." His voice was calm, almost casual, but something about it sent a strange feeling through me. I turned toward him, my small fingers gripping the edge of the pool. What is it? I asked hesitantly. He smiled faintly, tilting his head as if considering whether he should answer. Tyler. I froze. That was my name. But how could he possibly know it? I had never seen him before. And I was sure my parents hadn't called me by name while I was inside. My heart began to race. How do you know my name? I demanded. His smile widened, but it wasn't mischievous or playful. It was almost knowing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said one word that made my blood run cold. Future. At 7 years old, I wasn't capable of processing the implications of what he had said. But my instincts screamed at me to leave. I scrambled out of the pool, my wet feet slapping against the tiles as I ran toward the door. My small frame shaking with fear. My mother saw me rush out, tears welling in my eyes, and immediately knelt beside me. What's wrong, sweetheart? I told her everything, the boy, my name, the way he had simply vanished. She frowned, glancing toward the indoor pool, and took my hand. Let's go see if he's still there. My heart pounded as we walked back inside. The room was eerily quiet, the water still except for the occasional ripple. The boy was gone. Not a single trace of him remained. My mother exchanged glances with my father, who had followed us inside. Maybe he went outside? She suggested, but even she didn't sound convinced. We checked the outdoor pool, the changing rooms, and even asked the lifeguard if they had seen a boy matching my description. But no one had. It was as if he had never existed. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept replaying the scene. What had he meant by future? Was he trying to tell me something? Warn me? Or was it just a strange coincidence? Over the years, I tried to rationalize the encounter. Maybe I had misheard him. Maybe he had overheard my name earlier and was playing a joke. But deep down, I knew there was something else, something I couldn't explain. As I grew older, I would occasionally dream of the boy. In the dream, I was always back in that dimly lit indoor pool, floating alone in the water. The boy would be there, sitting at the edge, watching, but in the dream, his eyes weren't just blue, they were glowing. And every time, before I could say anything, he would whisper that same word, future. The dream always ended the same way. The room would darken, the water would turn cold, and I would wake up, heart racing, drenched in sweat. Even now, as an adult, the memory sends a chill down my spine. There was something about his voice, his presence, that felt otherworldly. Then, something happened recently that shook me to my core. I was scrolling through an old box of family photos, looking through images of that vacation. One picture caught my eye. It was a shot of me standing near the indoor pool. And in the background, just barely visible, was a blurry figure sitting at the edge of the water. A boy with dark hair. A boy watching me. My hands trembled as I stared at the photo. I never remembered anyone else being in the room with me that day. Had he been real, or had he been something else entirely? Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, but this one haunts me to this day. And every now and then, in the dead of night, I still hear that voice in my dreams. Future. ... What do you think? A chance encounter with something beyond our comprehension? Or just an elaborate trick of the mind? Whatever the case, the memory of that boy, his knowing smile, and the way he spoke my name will haunt me forever. Story 5. There are places in this world that refuse to be forgotten. Some houses stand as silent witnesses to the past. harboring secrets that linger long after their inhabitants have vanished. This is the story of such a house, a place where the past refuses to rest, where unseen eyes watch from dark corners, and where the air is thick with whispers of something long since buried. If you believe that all hauntings are just figments of the imagination, then I challenge you to listen to this tale and decide for yourself. Every night, at precisely 8:30 p.m., I hear it, a sound so familiar yet utterly unnatural, the heavy creak of a door being opened. My house is old, its wooden floors warped with time, and the doors groan when moved. But this is different. My father and I live in an old colonial home on the outskirts of a small town in Brazil. The house, passed down through generations, is rumored to be one of the oldest structures in the region. It is called Casa das Sete Sombras, the House of Seven Shadows. No one remembers where the name originated, but the legend persists. Some say it refers to the 7 families who lived here before us. Others whisper that it is something far more sinister. At first, I brushed off the noises. An old house settles. After all, it wasn't until my dogs started reacting that I began to question everything. They are not the type to bark at shadows. They are well trained, protective, and rarely make a sound unless there is a reason. Yet, every night for the past week, the moment the door creaks, they go into a frenzy, growling, barking, their hackles raised. Every time we rush to check, the doors remain locked. Both the storm door and the interior one are bolted shut. There is no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. But the moment we return to the basement, it happens again. Within 10 to 15 minutes, the door will open once more, the sound reverberating through the empty halls. It is as if something, or someone, is testing the lock, waiting for the right moment. The strangest part? The cold. The first time I ran upstairs to check, a freezing sensation swept through me, as if I had walked into a room chilled by an unseen force. It wasn't a normal kind of cold, it was a biting, unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. I stood there, breath fogging in the air, an unshakable feeling washing over me. I was being watched. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but the sensation wouldn't leave. It lingered even after I returned to the basement, making me glance over my shoulder every few minutes. The house had always felt a little too quiet at night, but now, it felt suffocating. Then, things got worse. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. My father was asleep downstairs, and my dogs were at my feet. The sound came closer until it stopped just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, the doorknob twisted. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I wanted to call out, to scream for my father, but my voice caught in my throat. The knob rattled again, more forcefully this time. My dogs sprang up, growling at the unseen presence. The air grew even colder, and just when I thought the door was about to burst open, the rattling stopped. I didn't sleep that night. The following day, I did something I hadn't done before. I started researching the history of the house. What I found only deepened my fear. There had been multiple disappearances associated with this property. A young woman in the early 1900s, a drifter in the 1960s, and most chilling of all, a father and son in the 1980s. None of them were ever found. The last recorded owner before my family abandoned the house under mysterious circumstances. leaving behind all their belongings as if fleeing from something unseen. My father dismissed my concerns. "It's just an old house," he said. "Houses make noises. That's all." But I knew better. A few nights later, I was alone. My father had gone on a work trip, leaving me to watch over the house. I kept all the lights on, the dogs by my side, and waited for 8:30 to come. I don't know why, but I wanted to see if it would happen again. It did. The door groaned open. This time, I didn't rush to check it. I stayed in the basement, gripping a flashlight, my body tensed like a coiled spring. The dogs were rigid, their eyes fixed on the staircase. The cold returned, but this time, it was accompanied by something worse, whispering. It came from above, soft, unintelligible, like a conversation being held just out of earshot. My breath hitched, my legs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. I sat there, paralyzed, as the whispers turned into something else, laughter. A hollow, rasping chuckle that echoed down the stairs. Then, footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps descending the staircase. One slow step at a time. My heart pounded against my ribs. The dogs backed away, whimpering, their tails tucked between their legs. I clenched my flashlight, preparing myself for whatever was coming. The steps grew louder, closer, until they reached the bottom of the stairs. Then, silence. I didn't dare move. I barely breathed. I wanted to turn my flashlight toward the stairs. But some deep, primal fear told me not to. Whatever was there, whatever stood just beyond my sight, was not meant to be seen. And then, it spoke. A single word, whispered in a voice that was both distant and unnervingly close. "Leave." The lights flickered. The dogs bolted, yelping as they scrambled for cover. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my car keys and ran. I didn't stop until I was miles away. My father never experienced it. No one believed me, but I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it, one fact remains. I do not feel safe in my own home. There are houses that are simply old, full of creaks and groans. And then there are houses that breathe, that watch, that wait. The House of Seven Shadows is one of them. Whatever lingers within its walls does not wish to be disturbed. So if you ever hear a door creak open in the dead of night, think twice before you go to check. Because sometimes, the things that haunt us are not just in our minds. Sometimes, they are waiting for us to see them. And once you do, they may never let you go. Story 6. Some experiences defy explanation, leaving us with nothing but a lingering chill and a sense that we are not alone. Tonight, I have a story for you that is both touching and eerie, a tale of a long-lost grandfather, a whispered wish, and an unforgettable encounter beyond the grave. If you've ever wondered whether our loved ones watch over us from the other side, this story might just give you an answer. It was 2 years ago. On the eve of Father's Day, I had spent the afternoon going through old family albums, reminiscing about the past. Among the worn-out pages, I stumbled upon a picture of my grandfather, a man I had never met but had always heard stories about. His eyes held a warmth that resonated even through the faded photograph. And I found myself whispering, "I wish I could have met you." That night, I stayed at my grandmother's house, a cozy old home filled with memories of a bygone era. She had always preferred my company when my parents were away. and I didn't mind the creaky floors and dimly lit hallways that had once scared me as a child. As we both drifted off to sleep in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, I felt an odd sense of comfort, like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, an unexplainable thirst woke me up. I shuffled out of bed, careful not to disturb my grandmother, and made my way to the kitchen. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I filled my glass at the sink, the cold water soothing my dry throat. Just as I reached out to turn off the faucet, I heard it, a distinct set of footsteps padding softly across the wooden floor. Heading toward my grandmother's room, my heart lurched in my chest. It was too heavy, too deliberate to be the house settling. Instinct kicked in, and I rushed back down the hallway, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I reached the doorway, my breath hitched. There, standing next to my grandmother's bed, was a figure. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. It was a misty white form, translucent yet undeniable. It hovered by the bed, almost protectively. My body froze, a scream forming in my throat but refusing to come out. Then, the figure turned toward me, and my world shifted. It was him, my grandfather, though I had never met him. I recognized him instantly from the photograph I had seen just hours before. His face bore the same gentle expression, his eyes kind, filled with something I could only describe as peace. He looked at me with such warmth that my fear melted into something else entirely, an overwhelming sense of familiarity, of belonging. As if sensing my shock, he gave me a small smile, and then, to my utter disbelief, he winked. I blinked, not sure if I was dreaming. When I opened my eyes again, he had stepped back, away from the bed, his form growing fainter. Within seconds, he disappeared completely, leaving nothing but the lingering air of his presence behind. I stood frozen in place, my body trembling. The room felt colder, an almost electric charge lingering in the air. I glanced toward my grandmother, who remained undisturbed, breathing softly in her sleep. Whatever had just happened, it felt deeply real. I backed out of the room cautiously, closing the door behind me, and spent the rest of the night lying awake in silent disbelief. Morning came, and I found myself questioning everything. Had it been a dream? A trick of the mind? But before I could push the thought away, my younger brother approached me hesitantly. I saw him too, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at him, my body stiff with shock. You saw him? He nodded solemnly. Grandpa, he was in the room. I thought it was a dream. But, he looked at me too. The weight of his words sent a shiver down my spine. We had both seen him. It wasn't just my imagination. When I told my parents, they dismissed it immediately. They assumed it was grief manifesting in strange ways, the mind playing tricks. But my grandmother, she listened. And then, with a wistful smile, she said something that made my heart clench. I had a dream last night. He was talking to me. He looked just as he did when he was alive. He told me he was happy, and that he was watching over us. She didn't question me, didn't laugh or call me crazy. Instead, she simply believed, and in that moment, I knew with every fiber of my being that what I had seen was real. That evening, as the sky faded into twilight, I sat outside on the porch, watching the fireflies flicker in the humid air. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still around, watching, waiting, and though I couldn't see him anymore, I whispered a quiet thank you into the night, hoping he could hear me. Some encounters change you forever. That night, I felt something I can't quite explain, a presence. A connection that surpassed the boundaries of life and death. Maybe our loved ones never really leave us. Maybe they linger in the spaces between dreams and reality, watching, guiding, and waiting for the right moment to let us know they are still there. And maybe, just maybe, I will see him again. Story 7. It's strange how silence can play tricks on the mind. How the dim glow of a screen in a quiet house can feel like a beacon against an unknown force lurking just beyond the walls. This is not a tale woven from imagination, nor is it the fabrication of a restless mind. What happened to me that night remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. A month ago, I found myself home alone for the evening. My older brother, Daniel, and my dad were out, browsing for a new guitar at a store on the other side of town. My mom was working the night shift at the hospital. It was just me, in our quiet suburban house, trying to finish an essay for my English class. The soft hum of my laptop was the only sound accompanying the rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. Outside, the streetlights cast elongated shadows across the pavement, and the wind howled softly, rattling the window panes. That was when I heard it. A voice, calling my name. My fingers froze over the keyboard. My heart pounded. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it was eerily familiar, like someone I had known in another life. I turned my head towards the door, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing, just the dimly lit hallway stretching into darkness. A deep sense of unease settled over me, and I did what any rational person would do. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer and slowly walked around the house, checking every room. The wooden floors creaked beneath my steps, each sound amplified in the suffocating silence. The air felt heavy, charged, as if something unseen was watching, waiting. Nothing. The house was empty. I let out a shaky breath and returned to my room, locking the door behind me. Still gripping the knife, I grabbed my phone and called my best friend. "Olivia." "Liv," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "Something's not right." She immediately sensed the fear in my voice. "What happened?" I told her everything, the voice, the eerie stillness, the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to linger in the corners of my home. We kept talking, her voice grounding me, pulling me away from the abyss of my own fear. I was beginning to calm down when something else happened. My music stopped, not paused, not skipped, just stopped. The song had been playing in the middle of a verse. And suddenly, silence. I stared at my computer screen, my pulse quickening. Before I could reach for my mouse, another song started playing, a song I didn't even have in my playlist. It was a slow, sorrowful tune, distorted as if played from an old, broken record player. I felt sick. "Liv," I whispered, my grip tightening on the phone. "I didn't play this." She tried to reassure me, suggesting maybe it was a glitch. But I knew better. Something was here. I begged her to come over, and she agreed. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I ran to the door, threw it open. No one was there. The wind howled through the trees, but the street was empty. My stomach twisted into knots as I slammed the door shut and locked it. I curled up in the corner of my room, all the lights on, my knife still clutched tightly in my hand. The doorbell rang again. This time, when I checked, Olivia was there. She took one look at me and knew something was seriously wrong. Together, We searched every room, every closet, every dark corner, but we found nothing. Trying to ease my nerves, she suggested we watch some TV to distract ourselves. Just as we turned it on, my pet turtle, Sheldon, suddenly jumped into his water tank with a loud splash, making me scream. And then, we heard it again. A voice, calling my name. Only this time, Olivia heard it too, her face drained of color. "Did you?" I nodded, barely breathing. The voice came from upstairs. And in that moment, I remembered something. My mom had kept an old jewelry box that once belonged to our neighbor, Miss Eleanor, who had passed away months ago. It was in the attic. And Miss Eleanor, she used to call me the same way the voice had just now. Panic clawed at my throat. We needed help. I called Daniel's best friend, Lucas, who lived down the street. He was older, taller, stronger. I needed someone who wasn't as terrified as I was. He arrived within minutes, his expression shifting from amused skepticism to concern when he saw my face. "All right," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Where's this ghost hiding?" We stayed in the living room, keeping an eye on the staircase. The air felt thick, pressing against our chests. We tried to talk about normal things, school, sports, anything to keep our minds occupied, when suddenly, it happened again. "Hannah? Hannah, where are you?" The voice echoed down the stairs. My blood turned to ice. Olivia grabbed my arm. Lucas's confident smirk vanished. Then I felt it. Something brushed against my foot. I screamed. Olivia screamed. Lucas jumped to his feet. We scrambled onto the couch, huddled together like children hiding from a monster under the bed. Then, as if things weren't terrifying enough, the garage door groaned open. But there was no car. We waited, breathless, but no one entered. The door had opened on its own. Desperation took over. We turned on every light, every piece of electronics that played sound, music, television. Even the microwave beeped in the background. Anything to drown out the silence. An hour later, my dad and Daniel finally came home, oblivious to the horror we had just endured. The moment they walked in, the house seemed to return to normal. The air lightened, the shadows receded. But that night, as I sat in my room, chatting with my friends on AIM, I saw it again. The shadow of footsteps in the hallway. I knew no one was there. My family was in the living room. The feet stopped right outside my door. I yanked the door open. Nothing. Only an old pair of shoes, placed neatly across the hall, shoes that hadn't been there before. From that night on, I never saw or heard anything again in that house. But in other places, that's a different story. And maybe one day, I'll tell you about them. Some experiences leave a mark on us, even if we try to move on. Was it Miss Eleanor's lingering spirit, attached to the jewelry box? Or was it something else? Something that had taken notice of my fear and decided to play with it? Whatever it was, I know one thing for sure: some doors, once opened, can never truly be shut. Story 8. I have always believed that some places carry echoes of the past. Shadows of things best left undisturbed. Sometimes, those shadows follow you home. They creep into your life when you least expect it, whispering in the night, waiting in the dark. My story isn't just about a haunting. It's about an encounter that altered the course of my reality forever. It all began when I was 16. In a house I barely knew, with a friend I thought I could trust. My mother divorced my father in 2000. And by the following year, we had moved in with her boyfriend, soon to be her husband, Eric. It was a new home, a new city, and a fresh start, or so I thought. Being the new girl, I quickly gravitated toward someone who seemed to share my sense of curiosity and rebellion against the strict religious upbringing we had both experienced. Her name was Rachel. We were both raised in the LDS faith but had begun questioning everything we had been taught. In our search for answers, we turned to something we had been warned never to touch, a Ouija board. Rachel's older sister had left hers in the closet, and that night, we decided to use it. At first, it felt like a joke, a game. We asked the board questions, half expecting nothing, yet strangely, some of our inquiries received answers. Others, however, remained shrouded in eerie silence. Disappointed but not deterred, we put the board away and returned to her bedroom, thinking nothing of it. Then the noises started, a faint shuffling outside her door. Slow, uneven, like footsteps dragging across the wooden floor. We froze. The house was supposed to be empty. Her parents were away for the night. We turned on the light and watched the door, praying it would remain shut. It didn't. Instead of creaking open slowly, as I had heard in ghost stories, it burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Beyond it, the hallway was nothing but a gaping abyss of darkness. As we stared in horror, the single light bulb in Rachel's room flickered violently, then shattered. The room was swallowed by darkness, and we screamed. We bolted, up the stairs, out the front door, and straight to the nearest safe place we could think of, her friend's house down the street. We spent the night there, refusing to speak about what had happened until daylight came. The next morning, we cautiously returned. Rachel's room was a disaster. Her mattress was overturned, books and personal belongings strewn across the floor, drawers yanked from the dresser. It looked like a break-in, yet there were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The police were called, but they were just as baffled as we were. No footprints, no fingerprints, no rational explanation. We thought it was over. We were wrong. For the next month, something tormented me every night between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. I would hear my name whispered in the darkness, feel the weight of an unseen presence pressing against my chest. One night, I woke up to my entire bed shaking violently. I ran to my mother, but she dismissed my stories as childish imagination, an attention-seeking stunt. I refused to sleep in my room after that, choosing instead to curl up on the living room couch. But even there, I could sense it, watching, waiting, and then, after one long, grueling month, it stopped. For a while, I convinced myself that it had been a psychological episode, a symptom of stress or fear-induced delusion. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew better. 2 years later, after enduring countless hardships at my mother's house, I finally moved in with my father. His home was my sanctuary, safe, warm, free from the suffocating presence that had plagued me before. I began to feel normal again. But then it returned. This time, it was different. It didn't shake my bed or slam doors open. It infiltrated my dreams. At first, the nightmares were vague, shadowy figures lurking at the edges of my vision. Whispers that grew into unintelligible screams. Then they became more vivid, more violent. I dreamt of unspeakable horrors, of rage, suffering, and death. The worst dream of all was of a young girl, her face contorted in despair, taking her own life after an act of unimaginable betrayal. Every single time, I woke up at exactly 5 a.m., drenched in sweat. Even on nights when I managed to escape the nightmares, I was still woken up by the sound of my name being whispered in my ear. Rachel suffered worse than I did. Whatever we had invited that night had attached itself to her more aggressively. She told me of shadowy figures standing at the foot of her bed, of unseen hands gripping her wrists, of waking up to find bruises on her skin that she couldn't explain. She had tried to ignore it, but ignoring something doesn't make it disappear. It lingers, it waits, it feeds on fear. Years have passed, yet even now, I can feel it. There are nights when I wake up and swear I see something standing in the corner of my room. There are moments when the air around me feels too thick, too still, as if I am not alone. I have tried to rationalize, to explain it away, but some things defy explanation. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. What happened to me and Rachel was not just an overactive imagination. It wasn't just a childhood prank gone wrong. I have heard stories of people experiencing unexplainable things after using a Ouija board. But I never expected to be one of them. I don't know what we contacted that night. I don't know what it wanted. But I do know one thing. Whatever it was, it never left. Story 9. There are stories that linger in the space between the living and the dead. Echoes of unresolved emotions that refuse to be silenced. Tonight, I want to share with you an unsettling account of one woman's experiences after the death of her estranged father. A tale that blurs the lines between coincidence and paranormal activity. As I recount this story, I invite you to decide for yourself whether this was simply a trick of the mind or something far more profound. After more than 25 years without contact, Evelyn received a call that her father had passed away. It was a moment of mixed emotions. There was no deep sorrow, only the weight of a past filled with absence. Alongside 3 of her 4 siblings, she traveled to Bridgeport, Connecticut, to attend his funeral. As they sat in the funeral home, discussing their father with the director, the overhead lights flickered repeatedly. The siblings exchanged uneasy glances. Was it a mere electrical issue? Or was their father trying to make his presence known? They had always held unresolved anger toward him. Perhaps he knew. And perhaps, even in death, he wanted to be acknowledged. Returning to Virginia Beach, where she lived with her husband and children, Evelyn tried to put the funeral behind her. But strange things began happening. One night, she and her husband returned home from an evening out. The children were sound asleep. The house was quiet. Evelyn sat at the computer while her husband settled into the living room. Without warning, the kitchen faucet turned on at full force. The sound of rushing water shattered the silence. Her husband jumped up and rushed to the kitchen, shutting it off. But the question remained. Who had turned it on? The eerie sensation that they were not alone settled heavily in the house that night. A few months later, the family moved to a new home. But whatever force had begun to manifest in their lives did not leave them behind. One day, Evelyn's youngest son, only 3 or 4 at the time, stopped in his tracks, staring at something no one else could see. His small voice trembled as he described a ghostly figure moving through the house, from the front door, through the dining room, and vanishing into nothingness. Later that evening, Evelyn and her oldest son were in the kitchen when they heard a loud metallic crash. As if someone had dropped a baking sheet onto the floor. They turned to look. Nothing was out of place. Every drawer and cabinet remained closed. Yet the sound had been undeniable. The disturbances grew, Footsteps creaked across the wooden floors upstairs. Though no one was there, the lights flickered, not all at once, but one lamp at a time, as though an unseen presence was moving through the house, testing the limits of its reality. One evening, while standing in her bedroom, Evelyn decided to take a photograph of her window. When she reviewed the image, her breath caught. Staring back at her was a shadowy figure. The family, by this point accustomed to the supernatural occurrences, gave their uninvited guest a name: George. Things took a darker turn in March of 2006 when Evelyn's mother moved in with them. The atmosphere of the house shifted. George's presence felt weaker, almost as if he had left. But something else had taken his place. Something far less benign. The house no longer felt merely haunted, it felt threatened. Then, as if sensing the impending change, Evelyn's mother fell gravely ill. Within weeks, she was bedridden, her body weakened beyond recovery. As the end neared, a priest came to administer her last rites. As he uttered the words, "And unto you, Lord, I lift up my soul," a deep, guttural sound escaped Evelyn's mother. Her stomach hollowed, her chest lifted unnaturally, and then, silence. The moment was captured on videotape. No unexplained movements, no flickering lights, just the unsettling sensation that something unseen had happened within that moment. 2 days later, at exactly 11:12 a.m., Evelyn's mother took her last breath. But just before that moment, something inexplicable occurred. Evelyn's youngest sister, who sat at their mother's side, suddenly fell backward onto the bed. Her hands ran up and down her arms. Her voice filled with shock as she said, "Oh my God, I feel her. I can feel Mom. She's here." She gripped her shirt, breathing deeply. "I can smell her. I can smell Mom." Evelyn and her other sister exchanged bewildered glances. What had just happened? Had their mother's spirit truly lingered for a moment, reaching out in a way that defied all logic? And then, all at once, the house was silent. From that day forward, there were no more footsteps, no flickering lights, no ghostly figures. It was as if the energy that had lingered for so long had been released, finding peace or moving on to a place beyond their comprehension. The story of Evelyn and her family is one that raises more questions than answers. Was it her father's spirit that followed her home from Connecticut? Was he waiting for her mother to pass, ensuring that some unresolved business was completed? Or was the sinister presence in their home something else entirely, something beyond their understanding? And then, there is the most chilling part of all. If George was not the only entity in the house, then what, or who, had been lurking in the shadows? Perhaps some spirits linger, not out of malice, but out of unfinished stories. But as Evelyn herself admitted, if there was one thing she was certain in, it was that she missed George. What do you think? Was it all coincidence? Or did something truly supernatural unfold in Evelyn's life? Let me know your thoughts. Story 10. This is the final story of today's video, and it is one that truly lingers in the mind. A tale of love, loss, and an unseen presence that never truly left. Whether you believe in spirits or not, what you are about to hear might just change your mind. My grandmother passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. Though she is gone, I firmly believe that she never really left. She remains here, within these walls, watching over us, because we still keep her urn in our home. It's something that I have sensed for a long time. But I am not the only one. My friends, who often visit, Each express the same eerie feeling, as if unseen eyes are watching them. Some dismiss it, while others are deeply unsettled by it. One evening, my best friend, Claire, came over to watch a movie. Everything was normal at first, but as the film played, I noticed her shifting uncomfortably. Every so often, she would glance around the room, her face troubled. I finally asked her if she was all right, and she hesitated before admitting, "I keep getting chills." I reassured her, dismissing it as a random occurrence, and we tried to focus on the movie. But not 15 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the air around us felt heavier, thicker, as though someone else was there with us. We both felt it, the presence. That's when I told her the truth. "I think my grandmother is still here," I confessed. Claire stared at me, her expression unreadable at first, then softened with understanding. "Maybe she just wants to know who I am." Then, with the quiet conviction of someone who truly believed, she said, "You should introduce me." I hesitated. It felt strange to speak into the emptiness, but something inside me urged me to do it. So, I looked straight ahead and spoke clearly. "Grandma, this is my best friend, Claire." For a moment, the room held its breath. The air no longer felt thick, and the tension dissipated. Claire let out a deep sigh, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. "I feel better now," she said simply. We continued watching the movie, and the night went on without further disturbances. But when it was time for her to leave, Claire paused at the door. She turned to me with a soft smile and said, "Your grandma just wanted to know who I was." That moment stayed with me. From that day forward, whenever a new friend visited and mentioned feeling chills, I knew exactly what to do. Without hesitation, I would introduce them to my grandmother. And every time, the atmosphere would shift, as if she had finally acknowledged their presence. As time passed, I started noticing other subtle occurrences, lights flickering when I walked into a room, faint whispers at night, and the occasional, gentle creak of a rocking chair that had not been used in years. It was as if my grandmother was still making her presence known in small, comforting ways. One particularly eerie night, I woke up to the sound of murmuring. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I listened closer, it felt like a soft hum, a lullaby that my grandmother used to sing when I was a child. I was alone in my room, yet the sound was unmistakable. I lay there, frozen, unsure of what to do, but instead of fear, a wave of calm washed over me. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Good night, Grandma." And then, just like that, the humming stopped. Even now, years later, whenever something strange happens in the house, a sudden cold draft, the sensation of a light touch on my shoulder, I smile, knowing that she is still here, watching over me. This story is a reminder that love does not fade with death. My grandmother may no longer be physically here, but her spirit lingers, watching over me, making sure that those around me are safe. Perhaps she is simply ensuring that I am in good company. Perhaps she just wants to be remembered. If you've ever felt a presence in your home, maybe it's not something to fear. Maybe, just maybe, it's someone you love, still looking out for you. Thank you for joining me in today's journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, some stories never truly end.